I think it's easy maybe to think about the story of the trade war with the US in the abstract, but if you're in the world of publishing in Canada, the anxiety is very high right now. That is because some of the potential tariff measures on the table could be catastrophic for the world of books. Today on the show, what does a trade war mean for books? I'm Elamin Abdelmahmoud, and this is Commotion. Look, so I know you've been paying attention to the trade war, but how Canada promises to respond to any tariffs that the U.S. puts on us, that is something that is kind of currently in the big conversation. And one of the counter-tariffs that Ottawa is proposing has Canada's books industry pretty anxious. That's because these proposed counter-tariffs could include books coming from the United States into Canada. And that is a move that the Canadian Independent Booksellers Association and Indigo believe will have, quote, devastating consequences for Canada's book economy. Josh O'Kane wrote all about this. He's here with me to unpack all of it. Josh, welcome to the show, friend.
Your doom and gloom correspondent is back.
I gotta say, you've been kept busy. You know what I mean? I feel like
a little bit.
Just the idea of the business of entertainment becoming a beat, and then suddenly this falls upon your lap. There's just all kinds of chaos, hey?
There's a lot happening every day, all of the time.
And I'm grateful that you've got your eye on all of it. Okay, let's start with all of this. I think the obvious question for somebody listening is, how does a counter tariff on books coming from the United States into Canada end up impacting the book economy here? And it just so happens that Liberal leader Mark Carney's book is maybe the perfect way to illustrate how that works. Do you want to tell people how it works?
Yeah. So last week, indie bookstores across the country started rapidly talking to each other about, like, wait, what's going to happen with the counter tariffs for us? And Paul McKay, the manager of King's Co-op Bookstore in Halifax, basically just put out a little tweet thread, and then at the end of it, he's like, you want to know a really great example? Mark Carney. His 2021 book Values, the latest edition that Paul had at King's Co-op Bookstore, he opened it up and it said, printed in the United States. So what does that mean? It means that the sitting prime minister at that moment had a book printed in the United States, which, if the federal government were to put counter tariffs on books, as is currently on the proposed list, that even the prime minister's book would be subject to tariffs coming into the country.
I again, have to imagine somebody listening to this going like, wait, what do you mean it's printed in the United States? Because I do think like that is part of things that people don't understand how that works. I should say we both have books out. You have them sitting in front of you.
I brought props.
That's my book. That's your book. Mine was printed here in Canada because I'm a patriot, and yours was printed in the United States, presumably because you're not.
Of course.
Do you want to maybe talk a little bit about how that works? Because we are both Canadian. We are both with Canadian publishers, and yet part of the supply chain of how large publishers work is some printers are in the U.S.
Yeah, and I know everyone tunes into Commotion because they want to hear about supply chain.
They do today, baby. Let's go.
A lot of this has to do with the fact that I think it's just under 95% of books, English language books sold in Canada are through the larger multinational companies. So Penguin Random House Canada, Simon & Schuster, HarperCollins in particular, the big three here in this country. They have integrated supply chains around the world. They also have, because again, they have so much of the market, they have a lot of Canadian authors, including both of us. And as a result, if with these, again, I'm so hesitant to use this phrase, integrated supply chain around the world, of course, they're going to print where it makes the most sense for those organizations. This is the result of globalization, which is, again, I'm sure exactly why people want to tune into the show.
But this stuff really informs how you get the entertainment that you get and the books that you get.
Yeah, the same thing happened with record labels, right? Radio stations, like across North America over the last 30 odd years. It isn't just books. So as a result, because so many different books are printed in the United States, including by Canadian authors, you are going to have books by Canadian authors who could be subject to this tariff.
Yeah. I think the argument they always hear about like the ways that these multinationals sort of incorporate each other's workflow into each other is that the argument for becoming a bigger company is you get to consolidate resources. So suddenly, we are two different imprints, but we can share a printer in the United States. And suddenly you don't have to go to as many physical printers in order to print the actual books. So now we got to talk about the fact that Ottawa's proposed counter-tariffs are going to end up affecting Canada's booksellers. Why is that? Like, how does that work? Because this is not originating from the United States. This is originating from our government, from the proposed tariffs that are coming from Canada.
Yeah, and it's worth saying as well that, the government is considering these. There's a giant list of proposed counter tariffs they have to find by April 2nd, according to their press releases, that they have to find $125 billion worth of goods coming from the U.S. to basically put forward the plan that's been in sort of motion for the last 6 to 8 weeks.
Yeah.
And so with booksellers, if booksellers suddenly had to account for this price, anyone could take this on. The publishers could absorb it at great cost to them.
Yeah.
Distributors could possibly absorb it. Or if it comes down to booksellers, they're going to have 25% on some part of the cost of these books is going to be added to them. So it could be negative for them in two ways. The first way is, what if they absorb that cost?
Right.
So when I was talking with Paul McKay, the manager of King's Co-op in Halifax, he was telling me, like, let's say margins are 40% on his books. So at the worst case scenario, maybe if, say, half the production cost, or let's say you put 25% of the wholesale cost of a book, then he has to eats into his 40%. He needs that money to pay rent, to pay staff, presumably to pay himself.
If his profit margin goes below 40%, it's like suddenly like rent is more, like maybe becomes a question.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And so as a result, these, a lot of independent bookstores run on like very narrow margins. They're not out there to make money. They're there because they love books. And so when you start cutting into that ability, what if the very livelihood of these bookstores is threatened? But then if you were to pass the cost on to the consumer, the readers who really want these books, then what are they going to say? They're like, oh, I have to drive 20 minutes to my local bookstore. Or Amazon, as an example, has the ability, because it's one of the biggest companies in the world, to absorb the price increases.
They can eat that cost,
And Canada's a pretty small market for them. So if they want to get more of the general book market, they just keep the books the original price, eat that cost, but in the end, they're getting more customers, which again means fewer people going to independent bookstores, which means independent bookstores threatened.
Because we're subtly talking about like a pretty substantial difference in the cost of the book if Amazon can eat that cost, but your local independent bookstore maybe can't do that. Let's bring in this whole Buy Canadian movement that we're kind of having right now, because like you've seen Canadians sort of saying, you know what, I'm going to get the thing that is made in Canada as opposed to the thing that is made in the U.S. We've developed this literacy about understanding the difference between made in Canada and packaged in Canada, and that feels kind of satisfying. But that strategy doesn't really work when it comes to things like books, because you can't just say, oh, I'm going to go buy a Canadian author and just kind of stop there. Why is that?
Because again, it comes down to the complex supply chain. Just say it.
I like the way that you say it in a scary voice. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it really just means like, what do you mean by buy Canadian? It's just so complicated in this. Like, are you willing to support a Canadian author because they will get paid from buying their books? Yeah. But if that is printed in the United States and it's subject to a counter tariff, then that is painful to you, but also like, it also comes down to the publishers. Like if you're really pushing to buy Canadian, like to what extent are you willing to do that? Are you willing to say, I'm not going to, buy books from a large number of extremely popular and obscure Canadian authors that happen to be published by the big houses? Yeah. Okay, great. But then you're not paying those authors.
Right.
But
that's not buying Canadian.
But there is a version of buying Canadian too, where there are a ton of Canadian publishers from coast to coast to coast. You've got Nimbus, you've got Douglas and McIntyre, you've got House of Anansi. Many of these are publishing a significant number of Canadian authors, and a lot of them are printing here in Canada. If you really want to go down that road, there are a ton of options, of course, available to you. Yeah. But if you are like, I really want to read the next Elamin book whenever that comes out. Okay.
Who sent you? Who put you up to this?
Then it's assuming you're with the same publisher, M&S. Then that becomes a more complex question, and the idea of just buying Canadian is not an easy decision to make.
Right. It's not as simple as saying this author's Canadian, therefore me going to buy this book. That immediately means I'm buying Canadian. You are supporting a Canadian author, of course, but also you're engaging in sort of larger systems that maybe you wouldn't necessarily know about. Yeah. You're right. I don't think people necessarily wake up in the morning and go, you know what I want to hear about is book supply chains. But I think it's important to shaping your understanding of a moment like this one, because we, particularly as a cultural sector, we are so tied to the United States in so many different ways that maybe people don't immediately think about. How would you say people can support Canadian book retailers in a moment like this one?
It depends, again, on your comfort level of what you want to buy in terms of buying Canadian. still go to the retailers, buy Canadian authored books.
Yeah.
Just be aware that, they may be published in the United States. So a portion of the money could be going to the United States or Germany or wherever the parent group of the large multinational might be based. You can just keep an eye out and look for the little label on the side that tells you exactly, who is publishing this.
Yeah.
But like as an example, you're published by McClellan and Stewart.
Sure am.
Storied Canadian publisher.
One of the most storied Canadian publishers, however.
It is owned by Penguin Random House Canada, which also owns the imprint that I'm published on. Yeah. And, it is based in Canada.
Yep.
The staff are Canadian.
Yep.
But it's owned technically elsewhere.
A German multinational.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so, I think it's just really comes down to just thinking about what you want when you're saying you're buying Canadian.
Yeah.
And, thinking about that as you approach the cash register or even before that.
The very cool economists listening to this conversation, and I'm sure many cool economists are listening to this conversation, are sitting there being like, oh, the solution is for Canada to diversify away from the U.S. market and away from like these sort of U.S. supply chains. How likely do you think that kind of diversification is for the book industry in this country?
It's extremely difficult. Like on the publishing side, we just don't have capacity in terms of printers to print in Canada. So even if you have the Canadian-run imprints of the multinational saying, if they were to say, we will print as much as we can in Canada, you can't just build printers out of nowhere. You have to bring them in too.
Yeah.
We have a pretty high, the capacity it's pretty limited. Whereas with bookstores, if you were to say if people were to approach bookstores and say we're only going to buy Canadian published books, that's going to be great for the Canadian publishers, which would genuinely love that massive extra difference. But what that would do is probably severely hurt Canadian bookstores, which depend on these multinationals, because that's just how the economy works.
Right. I think there is something that feels deflating about this, right? And I'm trying to sort of get my hands on it, which is the idea that it should be clear and simple to say, this is a moment of national pride. Here's how I lean into buying Canadian and supporting Canadian authors. And it should be it should feel that simple. But then everything that you're kind of laying out here is saying, actually, no. When it comes to entertainment in general, when it comes to culture in general in this country, it's never that simple. Certainly never that simple. You can't just boycott, American movies and TV shows because those are Canadian jobs, for example.
Of course.
So many of them are shot here, are filmed here, produced here. But then you get last week, the Canadian Independent Booksellers Association and Indigo, they both sent a letter to Carney and they said, hey, what if books were not on the table? What if we take books off the proposed countermeasures? The important decision date is, of course, April 2nd. That's when Trump says his round of tariffs will come into play. He's calling it Liberation Day.
Okay, all right.
But that's also when Ottawa's proposed counter-tariffs would kick into place. Just how likely do you see it right now that Ottawa is going to say, you know what, we won't use books as a part of our counter-tariffs that we use here?
I mean, I have no idea how likely it is, but I would guess by the strategy that the booksellers used, which is to just be extremely loud right out the gate when they realized that these counter tariffs had books on them. We haven't really seen an industry publicly go so hard to the news media, to writing letters to politicians, to trying to get meetings with the Department of Finance. Yeah. They're very aggressively and publicly going forward for this and explaining why this is going to be difficult for consumers and the domestic book selling industry. Yeah. And I do think that could be pretty convincing, if only because this list of proposed tariffs is way bigger than the $125 billion of goods they need to find counter tariffs for by April 2nd. So it could very well be that they're just like, okay, we will just cross that off the list and find something less loud.
Something else.
Yeah.
I don't know. Lumber? I don't know. Does that feel easier? Maybe not. I don't know. But I think there's a meaningful question for me as to say, Josh, I bet last year when you switched beats to the business of entertainment, you never thought your life was going to get this interesting, did you? Did you?
Listen, I care about supply chains, I said, as people stopped listening to me.
And I treasure that you do, and I appreciate you coming in. Josh O'Kane, you're the best. Thanks, friend.
Thanks, Elamin. Always glad to be here.
Yes, of course. Josh O'Kane is a reporter with the Globe and Mail. He covers the businesses, institutions, and economics and policy that shape arts and culture in Canada. He was with me in our Toronto studio. I'm Elamin Abdelmahmoud, and this is Commotion. Okay, so on Sunday, Anne Murray will be getting a Lifetime Achievement Award at the Junos. I don't have to tell you that the love for Anne Murray is never ending, but today we are talking about what is perhaps the greatest love of all.
You like that, Stewie? You like Anne Murray's music?
Do I? I've never known such happiness.
And oh, I just fall in love again.
What a woman.
That's Stewie. That's Stewie from Family Guy, proclaiming his love for the iconic Canadian artist Anne Murray. It turns out that episode of Family Guy in 2013 was a gateway for a whole new generation of Anne Murray fans. Tony Le Calvez is here. He just wrote about all of this for Pace Magazine, and he's with us right now. Tony, welcome to the show, friend.
Hey, good morning. Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
I'm so delighted that we're doing this. Okay, for anyone who's like not deeply into Family Guy, who maybe didn't see the episode, who's like, I don't know what Family Guy is. First of all, they should know, Stewie is an incredibly grumpy baby, but also he just loves Anne Murray. Take a listen.
The snowbird sings a song he always sings.
Are you listening to Anne Murray? I am experiencing Anne Murray.
Tony, I can't. Seth MacFarlane's voice for Stewie gets me every single time. Stewie doesn't just listen to Anne Murray, he experiences her. Can you just describe Stewie's relationship with Anne Murray?
Yeah, of course. So I think the episode begins with Stewie's mom, Lois, is driving him to like preschool or a birthday party or something, and she just turns on the radio casually, and her voice starts singing, and he just gets like enchanted. And every time he hears her music, he gets taken away into this like animated dream state. So I think when the first song plays, he like turns into a rainbow and explodes, and then when Snowbird plays, he turns into an owl and starts flying around, and he just becomes obsessed with her music.
The real Anne Murray does play herself in that episode. What does it reveal to you about, the kind of person that Anne Murray is, that she would be willing to be a part of that?
Yeah, a good sense of humor, first, because she came out of retirement to come do this role, and then at the end of the episode, they like hold her hostage at gunpoint while she sings her song. So I feel like she's got a good sense of humor about her career in the show and all that.
I want to get to your article in just a moment, but Seth MacFarlane, creator of Family Guy, voices many of the characters of Family Guy. There's something compelling to me about the ways that musical theater and grand music and like very sweeping music sort of plays a role in Family Guy. But what do we know about how Seth MacFarlane came up with the idea for that episode of Family Guy?
As far as I know, once the episode came out, he put out a tweet that said that he used to listen to Anne Murray in the car growing up when his dad would drive to the dump. So
amazing, as one does.
Yeah, he seems to be a fan, even if there's like the dump association.
The idea of like that is the music that has accompanied you on that journey. That's wild to me. But look, you're 27, you live in Southern California, you'd never heard of Anne Murray before you saw this episode, and kind of like Stewie, you're like, you know what? I'm in. You fell in love with her music. Tell me about this journey. Like, how has watching the show turned you into a fan?
Yeah, I guess I, like a lot of people, I watched the episode and I went straight to YouTube so I could find out more of her songs. And when I checked the comment section, all I saw were like, I love Stewie and Brian. They brought me Anne Murray. Anne Murray's voice is so incredible. Like, people were really just loving it in the comments. So I just found her songs. I started listening to some more greatest hits compilations and then diving into the records. And since then, I've just been listening to her since I was a kid.
Tony, I don't think you turn into an owl or rainbows explode from you, but tell me about the feeling that comes up when you listen to Anne Murray.
I think the best word would be warmth. Like her voice has such like a warmth to it. Her range goes from high to low effortlessly. It's like a warm blanket. That's what Anne Murray's music reminds me of.
Oh, I love that. I love that description. Listen, you're not alone in the way that that the Family Guy was a gateway for you for Anne Murray and Anne Murray appreciation. And then this spurred you to do a bit of research. What effect did that episode have, on exposing new audiences to her? Tell me about the writing of the piece and the other fellow Family Guy to Anne Murray pipeline compatriots.
Yeah. With a little bit of research, I saw that according to Google Analytics, searches for Anne Murray were an all-time high that day, and they still are. Everyone is checking her out. And then I guess I was inspired to write the article because so many of my friends also listen to Anne Murray because of that episode. So I feel like a lot of people in my age group, that's just how they got exposed to her music. I think she's like a 70s star. So she's had such a long like career that's been so consistent though. So just it's been able to reach people from all ages. So that's my experience with it.
What I like about that is you're like, I heard a song and I heard an artist and I heard a character have a reaction, and then I dove all in, and now you're like, actually, I'm a bit of an Anne Murray historian myself, you know. And I feel like that's not just an invitation to like enjoy some music, but it sounds like it's an invitation to have some devotion towards this artist, if you will. So let me ask you this: she's getting a Lifetime Achievement Award at the Junos on Sunday. In your opinion, like what's her singular achievement? What's the thing that you think about when you think of Anne Murray?
It comes down to like consistency and her career. Like how many artists really have like a 40-year career that long with that many hits? I can't really name any particular album that like stands out because it's just like the consistency, just hit after hit, years after year. I think that's why she's got so many greatest hits compilations, so many different compilations of songs that added together. So like really it's her career as a whole that's just so consistently good.
Tony, I gotta say, it's not most Canadians' way into knowing Anne Murray and appreciating her music, but that's what makes this story particularly unique. I appreciate you and your time and your appreciation of Anne Murray. So thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Hey, for sure. Yeah, always fun to talk about Anne Murray. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Talk to you soon. Tony Le Calvez is a writer in San Diego. You can read his piece called Seth MacFarlane's Love Letter to Anne Murray in Pace magazine. As you just heard a moment ago, Anne Murray will be receiving a Lifetime Achievement Award at the Junos this Sunday. You can watch the award Sunday night starting at 8 p.m. Eastern on CBC TV and CBC Gem.
People smile.